It's wonderful and amazing that we are surrounded by historical artifacts right now at this location that whisper stories of courage and conflict to be able to talk about a subject that is extremely close to my heart, the bright swords of Tolkien's Legendarium. This is an immense subject to attempt to explore in many sessions, but a short session like this one, I'm just going to have to glaze over some concepts and hit some key points. But my overall goal in all of this is to inspire you and to inspire us all, whether you're interested in swords or bladesmithing or any kind of art form. My desire is to ignite or fan the flames of the subcreative spirit in your own journeys. And I'm sure many of you are artists of many different kinds. Well, let me just say, last night I was one of the last, if not the last, person out of the museum. And it's just such a special and beautiful, beautiful setting here. The city skyline was stunning, the night air invigorating. So I just walked around the memorial by myself, continuing to appreciate the artistry and the inspiration of this amazing place. As I walked further out from the tower, I noticed, for the first time since we've been here, the flame burning atop the tower set against the darkness of the night sky. Seeing it for the first time was really quite stunning. I knew it was there, but I hadn't seen it before last night. And I thought to myself, this is a flame of the West indeed, a beacon of memory and hope. And given my talk today, the theme already in my mind, it brought me to thoughts of the sword Andúril, the flame of the West, reforged from the shards of Narsil, a sword that is not just a weapon, but a beacon of hope, legacy, and the will to stand against darkness. Tolkien's Legendarium, the rings, the Silmarils, perhaps even the Palantir, or even just treasure itself in the stories, often dominate discussion as the central crafted objects driving narrative and meaning in the Legendarium. Yet swords, forged with intention, imbued with history, and wielded as extensions of the bearer's will, stand as equally indispensable artifacts within the Legendarium. Now, that concept was originally my focus of this talk, but as I said, I kind of want to just hit some key points and leave you with inspiration. Whether it's Andúril, the flame of the West, which gleams with the red light of the sun and the cold sheen of the moon, or Glamdring, or Sting, or even lesser knowns like the Spear of Aeglos that I sang about yesterday, these blades are not mere tools of war, but emblems of identity, legacy, and renewal. And so this presentation is an attempt to start that discussion of what I see as an often overlooked centrality of swords in Tolkien's mythology, maintaining that they serve as narrative linchpins, which I will in this talk now dub narrative tangs, and symbols of human and elvish agency in the face of cosmic struggle. My own fascination with swords began long before I truly dove into Tolkien's pages. And of course, it would likely be difficult to find a child, even in our Silicon age, that hasn't at some point played make-believe with a wooden stick as a sword slaying imaginary dragons. But, and I wanted to include this personal story, personal memory stands out for me, talking about when I got into swords, so to speak. And I think it's worth retelling now, even under this limited time. Picture, if you can, that awkward age of the first day of junior high school. Sitting in a classroom, the first day, sitting in a classroom, buzzing with that chaos, hope, insecurity, all part of the new beginnings in so many ways when you change schools at that age. This was the very first class of the very first day of junior high for me. Our teacher announced that she had an annual tradition for each new class, and that would be to write a brief essay due tomorrow, answering this simple question, seemingly simple question. If you could go anywhere and bring back anything, where would you go and what would you bring back? In retrospect, that's a great question. It must be a real place and a real thing, though, and no time travel is allowed. So as you can imagine, groans and sighs echoed around from my junior high classmates. Teenagers love creative writing assignments, and especially day one of the new year. But for me, the answer was immediate. It was already in my head, like somehow deep in my bones already. The ignoble teen would be ennobled in this story. Turning in my essay the next day, my essay answer was not to go to Fort Knox and bring back all the gold. It was not to go to the Ford factory and bring back a Mustang GT. No supermodels would be rescued. No other common forms of teenage dragon sickness appeared in my essay. My answer just came out, was to go to England, to a medieval castle, and bring back a sword. That was my essay. And it just rolled out. And at least I got credited for the most unique answer. An answer which the teacher remarked that she had definitely never seen that one before. While my fantastical answer to the essay assignment entertained the teacher and the class, and is most assuredly now a forgotten classic of junior high school creative writing by all except for me. Now, I wish I had a copy of that essay today. I only have the memory of it. Because the interesting and truly fantastical part of the story is that that seemingly silly essay turned out to be something like some sort of a prophecy. By some strange alignment of chance and luck, in my early 20s, I got to go to England, I got to go to a medieval castle, and I got to bring back a sword. Specifically, a Scottish claymore, which I still have. It was the first sword I purchased. Which wizard or bored Valar orchestrated events to have my junior high school fantasy come true, I cannot say. But one part of the story that was not foretold in the essay is that I learned it's much, much easier to go on a quest to a castle in England, retrieve a sword, than it is to try to bring that back on the plane. That is indeed a difficult quest. It's pretty amazing that it worked out. So, if you had told that junior high school kid that that funny little essay would become a reality, almost exactly as it was written from my memory, of course, disbelief would ensue. If you told the 20-something kid who successfully convinced airport security to let him get on the plane, but ship the sword separately, that he would later become friends with bladesmiths through the Tolkien community, or be involved in the design and production of swords, again, disbelief would ensue. In fact, all of this, including my talk today, here at this wondrous, poignant memorial amongst so many wonderful friends, old and new, really seems like a long line of chance meetings and old songs that seem to come true. But this very brief time we have together, I can only, as I said, give you a very brief sampling of the unsung centrality of swords in Tolkien's mythology. Some of their roots in the medieval traditions he cherished, and their living legacy in the hands of modern artists and communities inspired by his vision. So, we'll try to uncover how these blades, these flames of the West, burn bright, not just in Tolkien's world, but in our own. So rather than driving a point home or honing an argument, I simply, as I said earlier, want to leave you inspired with the artistry we're going to see. I've made an attempt to organize this into 3 bite-sized portions. Hopefully, we'll be able to get through most of it. Hopefully conveying a cohesive vision. 1, swords as narrative tangs in the stories. I'll explain what a tang is if you don't know. The craft of swords, number 2, the craft of swords in Tolkien's world and medieval tradition. Very important part. And number 3, the modern renaissance of bladesmithing and Tolkien's legacy. Part 1. In Middle-earth, swords are far, far more than weapons. The swords themselves, the weapons themselves, are the storytellers. And I hope I conveyed a little bit of that yesterday if you saw the song performance of the Ballad of Aeglos, which the lyrics were written from the perspective of a sentient spear, Aeglos. Perhaps the most iconic blade in Tolkien's Legendarium, in Lord of the Rings, Tolkien describes its reforging with poetic reverence. The sword of Elendil was forged anew by elvish smiths, and on its blade was traced a device of 7 stars set between the crescent moon and the rayed sun. Very bright was that sword when it was made whole again. The light of the sun shone redly in it, and the light of the moon shone cold. This is no ordinary sword. Anduril's reforging is a pivotal moment. In this case, I would call it the narrative tang that marks Aragorn's transformation from a wandering ranger to the rightful king of Gondor. And as I said earlier, if you don't know what a tang is, if it's a foreign word, a tang is a very important part of a sword. It's the hidden but continuous piece of metal that extends through the hilt, sometimes sticking out the end of the pommel or hammered down. Essentially, it holds the sword together. The sturdier the hilt is, the more trustworthy your sword is going to be. So instead of linchpin, I thought tang would be a good way to describe it. And these weapons are tangs running through the entire stories from beginning to end. And as I said, not just swords, but weapons and crafted items of all kinds. Before the reforging, Narsil was the blade that cut the One Ring from Sauron's hand, shattering in the act. That broken sword carried by Elendil's heirs is a relic of a mythic past, a reminder of loss and hope deferred. When the elvish smiths reforge it into Anduril, they don't just mend a blade, they forge a new chapter in Middle-earth's story. Anduril becomes a symbol of renewal. Its red, symbolic of the sun, and its cold light, symbolic of the moon, are a promise that the crownless shall again be king. And I can't help but think that this narrative tang runs all the way back to the sun and moon symbolism we in fact have on the reverse sides of our medallions that we got this weekend. And the earliest marrings of Arda that needed healing by a rightful king. Tolkien does this all the time. It's one of the things I love about his works. He himself hints at the deeper significance of such acts of forging or creation. In his letters, he would write of the ennoblement of the ignoble through acts of creation, a theme that runs through his mythology. The reforging of Narsil into Anduril is exactly this, an act of subcreation that elevates a broken thing into a symbol of resistance to evil and hope for redemption. It's not just redemption. It's not just Aragorn who is renewed, but the very hope of the West. Other swords in Middle-earth carry similar weight. Glamdring, the blade wielded by Gandalf, forged in the ancient elvish city of Gondolin. Its very name, Foehammer, evokes a storied past, tying Gandalf to the deep history of the First Age. Or consider Sting, famous Sting, the lost and found again dagger that Bilbo finds in a troll horde and passes to Frodo. Despite its small size, Sting is a mighty artifact, glowing blue in the presence of those orcs and empowering 2 hobbits to face dangers far beyond their stature. These blades are extensions of the bearer's will, amplifying their courage and agency in a world overshadowed by Sauron's malice. The clock is creeping up on me, and I'll never get through all of this. So I'm going to need to skip around. The schedule says I have about 10 minutes left. So The idea of swords as more than weapons resonates with ancient myths Tolkien knew well. We could think of the dragon slayer archetype, a major element of Tolkien's works, and his own psyche, the dragon slayer, a primal story found across almost all cultures from the deepest of time in our own world. In the Bible, Isaiah 27:1 captures this vividly. In that day, the Lord with his sore and great and strong sword shall punish Leviathan, the piercing serpent, even Leviathan, that crooked serpent, and he shall slay the dragon that is in the sea. Tolkien, as a Christian and a scholar of Anglo-Saxon literature, undoubtedly was forever enchanted with this dragon slayer imagery he would often read about, study, and write about. The echoes of the narrative tang ring out specifically, and I love this, in Beowulf, and I put the quote up there. It's one of my favorite episodes or elements of Beowulf. It's just thrown in there, but it ties this narrative tang, as I said, to the source of evil, going all the way back. This specific quote must have set Tolkien's imagination ablaze, where we read of a strange antediluvian sword found in the lair of Grendel's mother. The description of the sword ties the origin of Grendel and his kin to an ancient lineage of evil spawned before the flood. Yet it is this very sword which Beowulf uses to defeat Grendel's mother, and then the blade melts away after her death, tying the mysterious blade to the Beowulf narrative as a whole. In Middle-earth, swords like Sting and Anduril take on this role, becoming tools of divine justice against the serpents of Sauron's forces. Now, there is one video, I had a couple of videos that I wanted to play for you, which I think I need to move on because our time is limited. So, the next part was going to be, and this is short, so we can play this if the audio will work. They're not just literary devices. They reflect his deep appreciation, Tolkien, for the craft of bladesmithing, rooted in the Anglo-Saxon and medieval traditions he studied and loved. For Tolkien, craftsmanship was a sacred act, a reflection of what we all know he called subcreation. In his essay on fairy stories, he described subcreation as the human ability to create art and stories that echo the divine act of creation. In Middle-earth, this is nowhere clearer than in the work of elvish and dwarvish smiths, who forge blades like Narsil and Glamdring, and all of them, with meticulous care, imbuing them with beauty and purpose. Just as an example of how this has influenced one of my crafts, I have a song on one of my recent albums called The Prayer of the Bladesmith. In it, I imagined a dwarven smith standing in his forge, calling on divine guidance to create a blade that is both beautiful but fatal to the forces of evil. The lyrics capture, I hope, the sacredness of the act, the smith's hope that his work will serve a higher purpose. Let's see if we can get the audio to play. And if not, we'll move on. There it is.
I bow my heart, remember to pray. The maker of the earth and the children, hammer of the one, hear my cry. Forge in me art of molten rock, until the seven fathers rise. I seek not seven
So as you can see, I tried to imagine the mindset of a bladesmith, a dwarven bladesmith, who might actually pray that he would get divine assistance in completing his work. So at this point, I would like to move on to a key video that I wanted to show you. And this was going to be the final part, the modern renaissance of bladesmithing and Tolkien's legacy, which really started back in the 80s with the Conan movies. A little bit here and there, but then when the Jackson movies came out, it ignited crafting fires all across the world, and the bladesmithing communities just exploded. So in this picture, you can see I'm actually holding eyegloss that my good friend David Delagardelle forged for me. And it's a wonderful, wonderful item. I'm also working on, with the Frazetta estate, on a sword with David that we designed for the Frazetta estate. So lots of amazing projects, is what I'm saying, have grown out of my own personal love for crafting, initially with swords, but now with many other things, and as the coin, as you saw. So I'm going to just end then with this video, which I've shown at other conferences. It shows a little bit of how Aiglos was created and how we drew from the inspiration of the stories to make Aiglos that lance that was keen, truly keen, very sharp, and then some of the other items that David, my friend, has worked on. So I hope you enjoy this. It's about 6 minutes, and then we'll wrap up.
Before I light the fire of my forge to shape steel on anvil, I let my imagination run loose with pen and paper. I dive deep into historical research as well. Even though Aiglos is a mythical spear from Tolkien's Legendarium, I like to still pull ideas from historical sources, the same way that Tolkien did when crafting his own world and languages. I also choose to take direct inspiration from Tolkien's own illustrations and doodles. Some of my favorite art from the professor was sketches he did on notes and envelopes, including the heraldry of Gil-galad himself. After studying the professor's art, I began to sketch my own designs, doing my best to follow in the footsteps of the patterns and the lines that he developed. Reading Tolkien's description of Gil-galad himself evokes an image of a strong warrior king, defined by the elements of ice and snow. I try my best to capture these elements in my art and end up with the final design of the legendary spear. Now that I have my spear fully designed, I'm ready to bring it to life with steel and iron in my forge. At the time when I brought the spear to life, I was working in my old smithy, using the simple tools of a propane forge to heat up the steel and a 200-year-old German anvil on which I pound out the blade with precise and rhythmic blows of the hammer. I chose to forge the blade out of 1075 high-carbon tool steel, and I forged the socket out of a separate piece of 100-year-old wrought iron. Once I have my blade and socket forged to shape, I grind the blade to a clean and perfectly straight geometry. Once I'm done with the grinding, I'm then ready for heat treatment. This is the most crucial point at which the blade truly becomes alive. By heating it up to 1500 degrees and then quenching in oil, I make the blade very hard so that it can retain a functional cutting edge. Finally, I do one last pass on the grinder to remove any fiery scale left from quenching. And then I move on to hand polishing with sandpaper and stones before I temper the blade. Tempering is the process of heating up the steel to a lower temperature, in this case between 400 to 500 degrees. By doing so, I make the blade springy and tough so that it won't snap under heavy usage. By doing this, I also achieve an icy cold blue color on the entire surface of the steel. Achieving this blue color also allows me to engrave the blade. I add designs from Tolkien's own artwork with a rotary tool and find a snowflake design he did and engrave it directly onto the blade. At long last, the spear is finished, and I'm ready to share it with the world. I was happy with the finished product and shipped it off to John, its proud new owner. But I hadn't yet crafted all of the Tolkien-inspired spears that I had dreamt of forging for years. My next and far more ambitious project was forging to life the spear of the hunter Valar, Arome. Arome has always been my favorite character in Tolkien's world, and I was desperate to take on the task of shaping a spear that Melkor himself would fear. I based my sketches and designs for the spear highly off of historical original artifacts, mainly Celtic, Latin, and Iron Age artifacts, all throughout the Bronze Age and beyond. I mixed and melded these different designs into what I thought would be befitting of the hunter Valar, and even took direct inspiration from Celtic early art in the ornamentation, decoration, and carving that I would add onto the haft of the spear and the sheath. I forged the blade out of meteorite with the help of my good friend, John Page. John is a skillful blacksmith and bladesmith, and we fused different layers of high carbon tool steel and the meteorite which he provided into the blade that we were extremely proud of. The process of forge welding and fusing together these different layers of meteorite, high carbon steel, and raw iron was an extremely time-consuming and labor-intensive process. It required massively high heats in my propane forge in order for the layers to successfully fuse together. With John's help, however, I was thankful that we were able to succeed in this endeavor, and once all the layers were won, I moved on to the process of grinding the geometry to a perfect and straight shape. Once I achieved the geometry that I was aiming for, I was then able to move on to heat treatment and final polishing. With the blade polished, I was also able to etch it in acid to reveal the folded layers of meteorite and carbon steel. I envisioned the spear to symbolically represent the midnight hunt, so I wanted it to have decorations that evoked feelings and imageries of stars and planets swirling like flowing gold in the vast midnight sky. I did this by adding engraved bronze pins through the blade that feature spiral Iron Age ornamentation, as well as constellation-like engravings on the blade and socket. I chose to craft the long wooden haft out of Brazilian oak, which I blackened with coal powder and carved with galaxy-shaped motifs. However, I wasn't finished with Arome's spear alone. I had one more Tolkien-inspired spear in my mind that I had.
I hate to end it now, but we're out of time. Well, anyway, no words are needed, as you could see. The inspiration that crafters like David and others are a direct result of the work that Tolkien did, and I think he would be absolutely amazed. While he was a little scared of the fans in the early days and thought people might become obsessive of the works, I think he would be amazed and really overjoyed to see the real world art that has coming out. And that quote where he talks about wielding paint, music, and drama comes to mind, but it's gone much, much beyond that. So I really appreciate you guys listening to this talk. I wish we had more time, but maybe we'll do it again. Thank you, guys.